And I love it even more now that I get a little older. I've gotten older and I've seen how these songs touch people and help people in difficult times. And I sing songs about heaven, and I think about loved ones that are there. And so this music has become even more special to me now, and I'm grateful for it. I love it, and so we're going to have an amazing, amazing week. Thanks for being here. If you've followed us at all, you know I tell this almost every night. My dad was a preacher of the gospel. Over 50 years he preached the gospel. My mom preached to him for 58 years. That's how we grew up. Melissa's dad was also a preacher of the gospel. My dad's in heaven now, but Melissa's dad is still preaching the gospel, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful for our heritage. But if you saw Melissa's dad tonight, all you would see is a wonderful man of God, a great preacher, a great, kind, gracious man. But what you wouldn't know unless he told you, you wouldn't know that before he came to know the Lord, he was a rock and roll musician and $100 a day heroin addict. And he was running from God, and he would leave Melissa's mom for weeks at a time, never call her, never tell her what he was going to do. He'd go out and play his music, take his drugs. And he says he lived his life for himself. He was living a life of destruction. And he'd leave, and then many times he'd come home in the middle of the night, and he'd wake his wife up, try to start a fight, and blame everything on her. Well, while he was out partying and playing music and taking drugs, one time, she went to a little church in the town they live in. He didn't know this, but she gave her heart to Jesus. And when she gave her heart to Jesus, she began praying for him. She stopped fighting with him, and she started praying for him that God would change his life. And it seemed like he got worse. He'd stay gone as much as he could. And when he'd come home, Melissa was a little bitty girl then, and Melissa and her mom would kneel by the bed, and they'd pray that God would change his life. And he didn't like that. So he'd get up and leave, stay gone as much as he could. They kept praying. 3.5 years went by. They kept praying every single night that God would change his life. Seemed like the prayers weren't working. Seemed like he was getting worse. But he tells the story. He said every night had to come to an end. And he said after the partying and after all the noise of the rock and roll music, he'd get back to where he was staying. And he said when he would lay his head on his pillow at night, he said in the stillness and the quietness of the night, he could hear the voice of his wife saying, Lord, please save my husband. He said, I could hear my little girl saying, Lord, please save my daddy. He said, I'd run as long as I could run. He said, I couldn't run anymore, so I went home. He said, I woke up my wife, and she expected there to be a fight that night. But he said, there wasn't going to be a fight this night. He said, because I said to her, whatever you have, I want. And he knelt. Yeah. He knelt by the very same bed where they had been kneeling and praying for him for almost 4 years, and he gave his heart to Jesus. And in that moment, God changed his life. And he was known in that town where he lives, he was known as the meanest man in town because he'd pick a fight with anybody. But he still lives in that little town. And I love to go visit him because I just went, in fact, a few weeks ago, went and visited with him. And when I walk around with him in that little town, you know what they call him now? They don't call him the meanest man in town. You know what they call him? They call him Preacher Jack, because that's what the grace of God does in a life. When it changes a life,